Welcome to Vinyasa in Verse, the podcast where we connect mind, body, and spirit through poetry and practice. I'm Leslie Ann Hobayan. Together, we'll explore different ways of connecting with our innermost selves and how to tap into the flow of the universe. Because once that happens, anything is possible. Your best life starts now. All right. Hello, loves. Welcome to another episode of Vinyasa in Verse. How are you on this beautiful day? Wherever you are, I hope you take the time to take a breath, to be present in that breath, and to find beauty in that moment. Okay, so today I have a very special guest. I'll do a little intro before I say who it is. I always like to keep you guys guessing. So she is a professor over at Old Dominion University, where she teaches creative writing in the MFA program. She's got 1 million books, and I'll just name a few. The most recent one was the winner of the 2019 Crab Orchard Poetry Prize called Maps for Migrants and Ghosts. I love the title. She won the Center for the Book Arts Letterpress Poetry Chapbook Prize in 2018. It's called What is Left of Wings, I Ask. And what's really cool about this particular prize is that at the Center for the Book Arts, they hand make these chapbooks with the letterpress. And it's just so amazing. So such beautiful work. But my favorite title of one of her most recent books is The Buddha Wonders If She's Having a Midlife Crisis. And I love that one. But one thing I want you to know about her before I introduce her to the show is that for 10 years to date, I think we're going on 11. She has been writing at least one poem a day, probably more, but because she's probably like super achiever Asian person like me. But welcome to the show, Luisa y Gloria. Woo!
Thank you so much for having me, Leslie Ann.
I'm so glad you.
What was that about super achievers?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Talking about? Yeah.
That's just part of the model minority myth.
Oh, okay. That. Okay.
Mm-hmm. That's all. I'm just perpetuating stereotypes. Ignore me.
Right.
All right. So before we get into conversation, let us turn to our oracle of poems, The Gift by Hafez, the great Sufi mystic poet. And then I like to do the little ruffle of pages right at the microphone. I'm going to see if we can stop towards the end. Oh, all right. Today's poem is called In a Circus Booth. Why let a fortune teller in a circus booth advise your heart? Out of 10,000 people who say they can read the fine print on a star, one might have that great gift, that remarkable vision to know the future. Better to let one like Hafez become your guide to our needed sobriety on this path. Be a friend to your heirs and purse. Listen, most astrologers, psychics, and healers would do more good for this world. Flipping soy burgers somewhere. Why seek guidance about your life and God from a grinning, coiled snake in a carnival show?
Wait, was there really flipping soy burgers in that?
It says in the print. Well, you have to understand the translator is Daniel Ladinsky, and I think he takes Makes liberties sense with the translations, where he tries to make it more relatable to a Western audience. Okay. So sometimes when I read these translations, I crack up, and I was like, "Soy burgers, really, Daniel?"
Yeah, I mean, I thought I was hearing things that.
No, you heard correctly.
Would you mind reading about from the middle part to the end?
I can. You know what? Let me do a second read.
Okay, great.
The whole thing. In a circus booth. Why let a fortune teller in a circus booth advise your heart? Out of 10,000 people who say they can read the fine print on a star, one might have that great gift, that remarkable vision to know the future. Better to let one like Hafez become your guide to our needed sobriety on this path. Be a friend to your heirs and purse. Listen, most astrologers, psychics, and healers would do more good for this world. Flipping soy burgers somewhere. Why seek guidance about your life and God from a grinning, coiled snake in a carnival show?
That was great.
Yeah. So what do you
Yeah.
think?
Well, there's so many
What's
things.
jumping out at you?
Well, that warning about the snake oil vendors at
Mm,
the end of the piece, the poem, I also relate very much to the idea of wanting to know the future. I mean, when I was growing up, people were always saying, "Oh, there's a fortune teller. They can come read your palm." There's a, you know, and I would actually come home sometimes one afternoon. There would be a bevy of women. My mother was in several civic organizations and women's clubs, and sometimes they would get together to do strange things like, fortune telling. They would invite somebody to come read cards. I
mm,
guess it's the equivalent of, people do tarot card readings, and
hmm.
they had their own thing going. But I'm sort of, what's the word I want to use? I'm struck by the idea that this poem talks about needing sobriety on the path.
Mm.
And then I think I heard something, I took down a little thing, something about attending to your ear and your purse,
Yeah. Be a friend to your
to your
heirs and
ear,
purse.
heirs,
H
AIRS,
Heirs.
HEIRS. Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense. So your
Yeah.
heirs and your purse.
Yeah.
And it seems to me too that this is a sort of admonition to us to pay more attention to people who are more able to talk about intuition in a more real way, I guess, than
Mm.
the carnival fortune tellers. I guess the more commercialized like things we would go to kind of read a fortune cookie and
Right.
buy a lottery ticket right afterward. Look at the numbers in the back of the fortune cookie fortune. So I like
Yeah.
that idea of how it foregrounds people like creatives,
Mm.
mystics, he says, psychics and healers. But I'm also reading poets in that group
Yes.
because he
Yeah.
says, listen to Hafiz, right? Who is a poet. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so that's how
Well,
I'm relating to
it's
it.
interesting because the way it's written, and maybe I didn't read it to reflect the way it's written, is that he's basically saying that astrologers, psychics, and healers should just go flip soy burgers because they don't know what they're talking about. And I think it goes back to the first stanza, why let a fortune teller in a circus booth advise your heart, where he's
Mm-hmm.
saying you should really tune in. And you mentioned it a little earlier,
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
intuition,
Mm-hmm.
like really tapping into that instead of
Mm-hmm.
going elsewhere, instead of
Right,
saying,
right.
let me see what the cards say,
Right, right. And I don't think it's giving a totally bad rap to people who are like believing in astrology or some sort of, other pattern view of the universe from the
Mm,
practical or the mundane. Um, the admonition to go flip burgers, I think, is a good addition because it talks about the necessity for grounding
mm,
oneself in the immediate world that one
like that.
belongs to. And that's the only way you can actually acquire a deepening of your own intuitive capabilities, which I think everybody has some form of that.
Yeah.
I don't think we are stones. So
Right.
we all hurt, we
Right.
feel, we love, we hurt.
Yeah, yeah. I really love how you took that soy burger line, which is so funny to me, but how you made it this opportunity for grounding, because it's so easy for us to get wrapped up in spiritual practices and like the divine and stuff, and like kind of float away, and
Hmm.
then separate that from being on the ground, from
Hmm.
being physically here and present with the people in our lives,
Hmm.
with whatever it is we're practicing, because there's often a gap, right,
Hmm.
in at least in the spiritual worlds, where it's like, oh, we want to achieve enlightenment, and we're just going to leave everyone behind, like, oh, you're not enlightened with me, so I'm not going to talk to you. It's there's this gap that I think people, I don't know. I think we need to bridge, but a lot of people just kind of let the physical fall away.
Hmm.
Like there's is it, yeah, I think it's in Buddhism, there's the misperception of this idea of killing the ego,
Hmm.
right? I mean, everyone thinks it's like literally kill the ego so that you're catatonic, when really that's not the
No,
teaching.
no. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not Buddhist. I was raised Catholic, but I do gravitate a lot towards the ideas that I come across in readings. Like, it's the reason for why I also wrote a bunch of Buddha persona poems in that book you mentioned. The Buddha wonders if she is having a midlife crisis. And I think what I was trying to do with that title in the first place, imagining the Buddha as a she, as
I love
not
that.
whatever prescribed gender that we ascribe to the Buddha from the stories that we hear. Because of that idea, you hear that a lot. I greet the divine in you, and I
Mhm.
think, or I greet the Buddha in you, as the Buddha in me greets the Buddha in you, which is sort of an idea about transcendence already being a seed that is inherently planted in each being.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know what else. I think you're talking about, what else did you
Just
say?
we were just talking about that gap,
The gap.
that
Yeah, yeah,
gap
yeah,
between
yeah. Okay,
spirituality and grounding,
got it, got it.
And
So
so,
yeah.
yeah.
So if you only tend to see the idea of transformation or transcendence as a one directional arrow, I don't think that's going to work, because it's always going to feel impossible. It's always
Yeah.
going to feel like it's somewhere just beyond and out of reach or in the clouds. And you'll never get it, not in this lifetime. So don't even try. But I think those arrows point all different sorts of ways. And I think that's
Mm.
another reminder of how you need to do the groundwork. You are trying to work out those details in your own, messy life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how do you find those moments? And I've been teaching I'm teaching right now a craft class, and we're looking at other kinds of narrative patterns to begin with that may be held up as additions to what we've been taught about the narrative arc proceeding only in one way,
Mm.
expository arc, the high point, the climax, and then the denouement, or the unraveling. But this book that we're looking at is encouraging us to look at organic patterns in nature. So look at the meanders, look at the spirals. This is a book by Jane Allison called Meander, Spiral, Explode. So those three
Oh.
patterns are the only things that appear in the cover or in the title, but there's so many other patterns that I think she doesn't even get to, because it's one book. She talks about branches, she talks about radials, she talks about rivers doubling back on themselves,
Mm.
those bow curves in the way a river meanders, where it seems like you're back to the same place where you
Right.
began, but it's
Right.
actually a different moment. So the
Yeah.
idea of transformation or ascension, I think we should stop thinking about that as a one directional or one kind of way or path to that. So there's such a
Yeah.
multiplicity of paths, I think.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love this book that you're talking about,
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
I mean, is it a craft book for writing
It
specifically? Because you can layer that on like a person's spiritual journey or
exactly.
evolution or whatever it
Yeah,
is.
it's a craft book, and mostly she's talking about it from a fiction perspective. She has
Mm.
something in the book which she calls, well, she does these craft analysis sections after she talks about the organic patterns that she'd like to work with, and then she applies it to her reading of certain favorite novels that she's looked at and studied over the years.
Oh, wow.
But I believe, and she said somewhere in I think the introduction, that you could apply this to all sorts of writing, and like you're saying, to all kinds of other like models that are not necessarily narrative to begin with, but where you
Yeah.
can see some sort of sense of a desire to see the shape that
Yeah.
something is coming into, or a shape that
Yeah.
you're trying to build, or the architecture of
Yeah.
a feeling. What is the architecture of a feeling?
Oh my God, that is a huge question right there. Like
Yeah.
when you said that question, I got all these chills. I was like, oh my
Oh,
God, yes, that's like
yeah,
a
yeah,
big
yeah.
question, because I mean, we'll parallel like the spiritual journey with writing also. It's like just human minds always want to be linear, right? They always
Mm-hmm,
want to go
mm-hmm,
from point A to point B.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
so, but when we experience feeling, it's like, let's say someone in our life passes away and
mm-hmm.
we experience grief, but grief is not a straight line,
No.
or if we experience love, it's not a straight line. It's not a destination. It's a moment, an experience. And what I love is what you're bringing to the conversation is this idea of sort of mapping it according to the patterns we already see in nature. And
Mhm.
that is so exciting because
Right,
I just
right.
think about like, okay, let's say I'm grieving the loss of somebody.
Mhm.
Um, and society and culture is like, you need to go through these stages of grief or whatever. But if I want to look at the vine of an ivy plant that's growing like along the wall of a building, and think about my grief in that way, then that's a totally different experience, and it might be more liberating for someone who's experiencing grief. So have you been
Yeah.
able to apply these patterns? Well, how did you find this book?
I don't know. I stumbled upon it, I guess. I may have read someone talk about it, and then I
Yeah.
went and poked around and found the book and started reading it and could not stop. And like I'm teaching it in every craft class that I
Yeah,
can now. I also
amazing.
teach it in a hybrid workshop that I've taught for like a couple of years now
Mm,
in the writing program where I teach. But yeah, that vine idea is great. The vine itself, the leaves don't grow along a straight horizontal or vertical.
right.
Although if you stretched out the vine stem, I suppose it could resemble a line. But
Yeah,
I like the way
yeah,
they kind of softly, naturally curl, and
yeah,
that's the
yeah,
way they are.
yeah,
So yeah, I
yeah.
love the image that you've also just brought up. Applying it to one's life. I guess we already, again, I feel like we have an inherent sense that's already pushing us to move towards some idea of, I don't want to say directionality because sometimes we don't know where we're going. I often feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going. Even if I am here and this is sort of a thing that I can describe on things like resumes and stuff like that, I'm like, I'm not really sure I know what I'm doing. So, does that happen to you?
Oh my God, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So,
But
I mean,
what do you do in that case? What do you
so
do in
you,
that case
I
when
feel
you're
like,
like,
it's like when you're entering, maybe a room or a building that you feel familiar with, you've been there before, or you don't, even if you don't know it, you know how a building usually is probably plotted out and arranged. There's a door, there's a stairwell, there could be a lobby, but if it's dark, you kind of feel your way along the wall until you hit a light switch. And
yeah,
that kind of intuitive fumbling that I think we
yeah,
all do in our own way.
yes,
So I
yes,
guess I do the equivalent of that. And I
yeah,
think it's the way we approach our entrance into our own writing, into our own poems. So
yeah,
the page may not be dark. We always talk about it as the blank page, this sort of
right. The white space.
terrifying whiteness, blankness, as if there's nothing there.
Right,
But
right, right.
yeah,
And then looking at that, and this just kind of popped in my mind, was looking at that white page and sort of seeing the words like emerge as if coming forth from the surface of water or something, just like
right, right, right.
so that brings me to a question about your daily practice of writing poems. How do you, thinking about this intuitive fumbling and using it as a way of entering into the work, how, well, one, is that how you enter into a poem every day? What is your practice for it? How did you begin this practice in the first place?
Well, maybe I'll approach the how did I begin in the first place because that's easier. It's like you can go back to an actual physical, literal point in time and say, I can say November 2010.
Wow.
But I did not know that it was going to be the beginning of a 10-year plus writing
Right.
practice, daily writing practice.
Mm,
I think simply that was a week where we actually had at least 10 inches of snow in Hampton Roads here, in the area. We're a coastal area, so snow is a rarity. And when it does happen, it's like big national emergency. And of course, my husband had grown up and lived in Chicago for most of his life, and he like laughs. That's nothing. And I do know that from having gone to grad school in Chicago too. I know those winters don't compare.
mm,
But so there we were stuck at home. Nobody could go out. There was no school. I didn't have to do anything really yet.
mhm.
And I started to feel like, oh, all of that stuff I was complaining about, we always complain about not having enough time to
Yeah.
tend to our own writing, and we wish we had that. And I felt like, okay, I have it. What do I do with it now? So
Right.
I guess I was looking for a kind of prompt, and poet publisher Dave Bonta, who is also now, of course, a friend. He maintains a couple of like blog spaces, and one of them is a microblog, which is nature themed, and he calls it. It's on Twitter. It's called The Morning Porch, and his basic premise is basically you wake up, first thing you see on your porch, you write it down in 140. What is it now? 220 characters
Maybe.
in
I don't
Twitter,
know.
something.
I'm not on Twitter, so.
Yeah, they gave more space. So he
Oh, okay.
writes down the first thing, but he's a poet, so he is trying to chisel down an image in a
Mm,
way that I think the attention of a poet is tuned to language and to the world in the same way,
yeah.
so that
Yeah.
it's not just Twitter. I mean, at least for him. And so
Right.
I've been reading that for a while because I had sort of met him by being published in one of the journals which he co-edited a while ago. So I saw something that day. I think it was an image of a woodpecker,
Mm,
but he wrote about it in a way that fused the woodpecker's body with something totally mechanical, like something
mm,
you would see in a machine shop. And that caught my attention. So I think I wrote a response right there in the comment box, but I found myself writing it as a poem.
oh,
So I said that was
cool.
cool. And I mean, I was not thinking about it. It just
Yeah.
sort of happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought that was cool. That felt good. So the following day, I'm like, let me try that again.
Hmm. Yeah.
Prompt, right? So then after that, I felt like even in that short, compressed amount of time, I guess when I forgot about the pressures and I figured out that there is a way to turn them off or make them less noisy,
Mm,
then you can actually get dropped down into that space. And I was
yeah.
like, okay, so great. So I'll take whatever I can. Instead of I complained a lot, moaning and groaning a lot. And when I'm unhappy, when you're unhappy, everyone around you is
Oh, yeah.
unhappy
Yeah. The
because
whole house is like, oh, no.
you inflict it on your world,
Right.
right? So she's unhappy. Stay away from her.
Go hide.
Right. So yeah, so I just said, okay, I will take no matter how small a time, 30 minutes. It's a luxury if I can do 45 a day. So I just
Mm,
decided to start doing that.
mm,
And I don't really set any fixed time of the day. I don't give myself predetermined expectations. I just
mhm,
come to it when I come to it to say, here I am. I'm
mm,
ready to write. So no
mm.
matter what comes out of it, I'm
Yeah.
ready for that. It took a while to get to
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
stage of just saying, let the writing happen or let me make it happen.
Yeah. So what happened before you got to that stage? Because I know that there are probably listeners who are like maybe beginning poets and might want to try this daily
Hmm.
practice. It might be helpful to say, hey, it's not always that. Let's talk about what happens before that
Before,
leads up to the
yeah.
magic of I'm ready.
Right. It's not always magic. It doesn't feel like magic even when I am there already. Sometimes
Mm,
it's more struggle and sometimes it's less. Okay, I understand. And I need to just keep certain things, quiet or let them just push them back to the background for a little while. They can come back and shout at you later. But
yeah.
like you usually have these tendencies of, I need to write or I want to write. I do truly, truly want to write, but somehow I'm frozen up or I don't know. I have this reluctance or it feels like a struggle. And maybe a sock drawer is easier to take care of right now. Or I need to Dewey Decimal System the contents of my refrigerator.
That
So
sounds
that's
like
happened.
fun.
Yeah, that's happened to me too. So, but then in that sort of fury of, not being able to get to the place where you would most like to be,
Mm,
then that translates into other, I think, kinds of actions that to me, they're also a kind of index to my own, I guess, in a way, sort of internal anxiety about this process called writing.
mm,
And
mm.
that's where the idea that, it's not all magic, it's not fairy dust, it's not like, I transform the minute I drop into that space. So it's still, I think it's very similar to, I've heard you talk about meditation. I've heard you
Yeah.
write about that. It might be similar in some ways to that idea of finding a point of quiet or a point
Hmm.
of stillness where you can just be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So without expectation, without, I mean, it's hard to say we are not creatures of desire. We want so many things, but to try and not, push too hard, push the envelope too hard and say today, because it's never happened that way. Today, I'm going to write a poem about this big subject. It never happens that way.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
So what do you do with the anxiety? Like let's say this was like right after you started, the small poems, right? We'll say it's January of 2011,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're already like, okay, I guess I'm doing this on a regular, daily
Basis. Yeah.
basis. Um, how do you how did you get yourself to return every day to
Mm-hmm.
that, when as a parent, as a person with
Yeah.
a full-time position,
Yeah.
and your commitment to other things, how do you say, all right, I'm gonna pause my life and do this thing, like, so what
Mm-hmm.
what kinds of obstacles did you face, and how did
Mm-hmm.
you how did you get through them?
I guess it's just a little bit of recalibration of the ways in which I think, the ways in which we think. We're writing teachers, so I think you can relate to when I say that we're always telling our students things like everything can become a poem if you
Mm,
just pay attention. If you are, for instance, in an elevator with lots of people and you overhear little bits of conversation, or you see a little interesting, somebody's dressed in an interesting way and it kind of jumps out at you and you file it away in your brain. Some people maybe will scribble down something furtively on a little slip of paper. You remember things. So we're all pay attention to use the things that they find in the world, in the daily world, in their life.
hmm.
And I'm like, I could practice that shit too. So
Hey, me too.
me too. I mean, I'm teaching it, and I probably do. We already do, but it's like, I think when we're giving out all the energy in terms of writing advice, we feel there are times when I feel very depleted from teaching, from caring
Mm,
for people, from, oh man, this semester I have like 6 thesis advicees, and that's, major investment of energy.
yeah.
And sometimes it feels like the energy is going outward. And so you need to recover and kind of turn that energy inward. So what you've
Hmm.
been telling people to do it yourself. So
Right, right.
one way, I think that's one way to do that. So then, of course, when I'm there, when I say, okay, I feel like I have time to write and, kind of like claim this time for
Mm,
myself.
hmm.
Anything then becomes fair game. Maybe I read something interesting before I came to my writing table. Maybe I saw a painting. I've done a lot of ekphrases because
Hmm.
looking at pictures is a wonderful way to get immediately immersed in
Yeah,
something that's already presented in some way as a kind of environment
yeah,
that's
yeah,
imagined, that's um, decked out in its own furniture, so to speak.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
just
yeah.
go in there and look around and see what that does to you, see what it makes you think of. So I've done a lot of ekphrases using the poems of surrealist painters that I like Remedios Varo.
Okay,
I've
cool.
done a bunch of ekphrastic poems uh, on the work of an artist who just passed away recently. That I learned that he passed away from COVID complications. I had
Mm,
not even met him in person,
mm,
but I was just so drawn to his work. This is
yeah.
Armando Valero. I believe he was based in California, and we
Mm,
were kind of connected on email by another poet over there, an editor who was putting together an anthology of poems that were based on paintings on artists' work in that part of our nation. So he pointed me to a website where there were like pictures up there. It was a gallery that represented
yeah.
him, and they were like mini stories. He also had a touch of surrealist whimsy in it, but
Mm,
I was just struck by the vibrancy of the colors, the stories that were sort of hinted at but never really fully explained. So I think the sense of mystery is also what draws me in.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I like to kind of find my way
yeah.
into a poem, into a story.
Yeah, what I
So
like about the ekphrasis process is that it also prevents you from overthinking
yeah,
because
yeah,
you're not going in with an agenda. Because I
yeah,
feel like that's a big like instant writer's block for
yeah,
people is when you
yeah,
go in with an agenda. If you're
yeah,
just responding to
yeah,
something that's not even your own, then
yeah.
there's this tendency for the mystery to emerge, but also just that creative spirit to just be like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I'm here.
Right.
Let's play.
Right. I like that you're
Love that.
talking about play because I feel like that's the kind of mindset that I was trying to attune myself to
Mm,
more rather than to view it as, okay, this is work. Let's beat the thing into submission. Let's get that
let's write a
poem
poem with a
right.
capital P.
Let's finish it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you play? Okay,
How do
we've
I
got the
play?
yeah, we've got the response to visual.
Yeah, sometimes I do that. Sometimes I use
Yeah,
visuals.
what else do you do to
I
play?
read, I read, so I'm usually often reading, So before that, I may have read just some interesting, arresting passage, either in a novel or in a poem, and it made me think of something. And maybe that was like the thing that said, hey, stop what you're doing right now and go. You can do something with this. Or
Hmm.
it can be like stuff I've seen, on the street, whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
going out. I mean, in the before time, there were many more things to see when you went out, within
The
10
before
those
time.
things before time.
So this is interesting that you mentioned the before time because I know for me, and some conversations I've had with my own students is that there is this extra layer of I don't want to say struggle, but more challenge
Mm,
to create
mm,
because we are so used to external stimulation.
yeah.
And so now what is happening with your work
Mhm,
that you're noticing
mhm,
from not having as much external stimulation as you're used
mhm.
to?
I guess I look for ways to make that connection feel like it's still there.
Hmm.
So I am thankful that we have some sort of a backyard, which is some sort of space you can feel safe to go out in. I mean, we have taken a few walks here and there.
Hmm.
And even going out just for a quick coffee with my daughter to pick up a coffee and bring it back, that's still a foray into the outdoors. But
Hmm.
just everything that crosses your window pane basically is a very, I guess that sounds very simplistic, but
But
truly anything can catch your attention.
well, it goes back to what you're saying about really paying attention to
Yeah,
details as a
yeah,
poet, right?
yeah, yeah. And I've said this a few times in recently. People will say, "Oh, so you write occasional verse? Oh, you write occasional poetry, like
What does that mean?
exactly." With there's a sort of hint of something pejorative behind that. I think I don't know that. Oh, you're
Well,
just
the way you
writing.
said it sounded like I was like,
Well,
oh, I'm offended. I don't even know
I
what that means.
I usually hear it said in that tone. Oh, you
Mm,
write occasional verse, like as if things that pass in front of you and catch your attention are not worth spending time on. The occasionality of it, like it's
yeah,
tied to some random event instead of what? Some big event? What is a big event? Aren't
yeah.
isn't everything
But
potentially?
isn't yeah, but
Mhm.
isn't poetry just about the details, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know. So now as you're sort of explaining what this term means, because the way I saw occasional poetry was like, oh, I only write once in a while.
Yeah, there's that meaning, but I don't think that's what they meant when they
No, but
when they
it's
say
just like
things like this.
these
Yeah,
events that happen.
yeah, yeah.
But it just speaks to like, well, what is poetry for that person? Because for me, it's like everything is an occasion, you
Yeah,
know. It's
everything is an
and
occasion for
and I
poetry.
don't and I don't believe in coincidences, you know. Like
Mhm.
I feel like the woodpecker that's pecking at my house is there for me to pay attention to
Mhm.
and laugh at the fact that he
Right,
thinks it's made of wood when it's actual vinyl siding, you know?
right, right.
So
So yeah,
I don't know what they're looking for, but
I don't either, but it seems to me like, oh, you look at little things and you turn them into poems. And there's a sort of underlying assumption there that poetry is about fluffy things, I suppose,
hmm,
to put it that way. Or
yeah. Yeah,
that
they're
the
not
significance somehow is
less than
limited.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are not my kind of people. So it's
Mm-hmm.
okay. They can write their own
Yeah.
poems and
Yeah.
we'll write ours.
Right. And I mean, I've also realized in teaching poetry for so many years that there, you offer the opportunity to engage more deeply in your classes with poetry,
Hmm.
but there are people who will get it, maybe fall deeper in love with it. And there are
Hmm.
people, you've just got to face that. There are people who will say, okay, it was fine this time around, but I don't think I'm going to do that again. And that's
Mm.
fine. That's their
Yeah.
choice,
Yeah. Yeah. You know what's interesting about those people? I always imagine them to circle back to this moment later in life and be like, oh, like the light bulb goes off, or suddenly they like fall deeper into the pit of poetry, like 10 years down the road. And then
Mm-hmm.
that's what they were saying. Oh my God, I owe my life to,
Mm-hmm.
no, that's just me imagining good things
Oh
for,
yeah, but
for
then
those.
that is quite possible. But maybe in the moment in which they encounter it, it doesn't completely fill a certain need that
Oh
they
yeah.
have that
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
they feel is fulfilled by some other thing.
Yeah. And that's
That's
fine because
fine.
everyone is where they're at for whatever
Exactly.
reason.
Yeah.
They're meant to understand and learn things designed for that specific moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, the seeds are planted. That's all we can do as
Right.
as
Right.
as teachers. But I want to get back to the play because we kind of got off track on
Play.
that.
Yeah. Okay.
I wanted to ask you about, do you play at all in your poems? Like, have you done any sort of, playing around with layout, with turning the page horizontal, like, have you done
Yeah,
any kind of
yeah,
play
I've
like
done,
that?
I like, for instance, there's forms that you can play with like that, abecedarians, double abecedarians. Is there any other way to write an abecedarian except for the straight ABC down to Z path? So I've done like alternate lines, like in the abecedarian, I would do an A for the first line and maybe a B at the very bottom and work my way to the middle. That's
Ooh,
sort of
that's
another way to
fun.
do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've written like, I don't know what to call them, like collaboration, call and answer poems with some
Hmm.
other poets.
Yeah.
That's fun. Or letter poems with other poets. It's always
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
I played with
Yeah.
uh, filmmakers who have done visual poems, and we
Oh,
talk about that collaboration. So
oh,
I
that's cool.
provide text, I provide the poem, and we talk about how are we imagining this as a third thing that comes
Hmm.
out of this conversation. So they have their film, they have their imagery, they have the things that they do as a filmmaker with a camera looking through that lens, and I have my poems, I have the language of my poems, and then we come together in that conversation to talk about what would this look like if we put them together.
Yeah, I love that. I love
Yeah.
collaborative play,
Yeah,
especially
yeah, yeah.
because
Hmm.
you get this other layer of someone else's idea of creativity
Right.
and play, and so
Right.
fun. It's so
And
fun.
I've started to recently go back, rediscover my love for doing art myself. I used to
Hmm.
draw a lot. And Rhino Reviews invited me to participate in last September's, what do they call it, graphic reviews issue.
Oh, cool.
So I did a collage, which was a graphic review of Dean Young's poetry book.
Oh, that is fun.
Hmm.
Oh, I might want to try that. I want to.
Yeah, it's very fun.
Oh, you're doing a lot of play. I had no idea.
I need to play.
Well, I don't know about you, but we're getting snow tomorrow, so maybe you go play out in the snow and then
Yeah,
write a poem in the snow.
yeah.
um I wanted to bring together the writing and the spiritual aspects of
Hmm.
what I'm finding in some of your poems.
Hmm.
And do you have, I know you said that you were raised Catholic. Do you have a spiritual practice, like a regular spiritual practice? Is writing part of that? Is it not? I want to see how they come together and
Hmm.
intersect or not.
Hmm. Well, especially since we aren't really going to places of worship or churches or convening in large groups, we'd go to Sunday Mass or Saturday evening Mass before, at least my husband and I. But
Mm.
that's really fallen away. We haven't gone at all. And even before, we were not very regular because sometimes we would just wake up with a shock on Sunday morning, realize it was near noon and
Oh,
half the day is
whoops.
gone. So you slept in. So, but I think one of the things that I take away from that Catholic upbringing that I still have today in my own fashion is the idea of prayer
Mm,
as an internalized form of speaking to
mm,
another, not necessarily just for supplication,
mhm.
but also for, I don't know, for disclosure, for company. You want to tell someone about this thing that you
Yeah.
are carrying
Mhm.
that particular moment, whether it's good or bad, I suppose. Although people tend to think of prayer as like, oh, you only remember to pray when you feel like you're
Y-
drowning,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. When you need something.
When you need something. So, but I think poetry is a lot like prayer, in
Mm,
that you need to go inside that room where you can kind of not only quiet certain things, but when you can feel like you can open up maybe what is most vulnerable in the moment of yourself to that very moment.
yeah.
So I think prayer is kind of, it has the capacity to draw out that sort of experience from
Mhm.
us.
Yeah.
So the idea that we're not just talking to ourselves, we're actually talking to something else in the living universe, no matter what you call this name, you call it
Right.
God or whatever name, but the idea of a universe that surrounds you and you feel sometimes maybe supports you more than
Mhm.
other times. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. And so it sounds to me that your way of staying connected spiritually is really through the writing.
Yeah.
Like as a Catholic, yes, there's mass and there's the benefit of being physically
Yeah.
present, right? And
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
in community with people. But
Right.
for your own individual practice,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds to me that these daily poems are part of that, are part of
Yeah.
this way of connecting with your innermost self. I
Yeah.
love
For
that
sure. For
image
sure.
of the box.
And I guess I went to a Catholic school in my elementary grades, and then the first year of high school was still in the same Catholic school. And you learn prayers, you learn to memorize things, and you learn their patterns organized by sound too. So I think the language of prayer is also very much connected to the language of poetry, because we're also looking for patterns like that, patterns of
Mm,
repetition, patterns of sound, and they can have all sorts of different related effects also on you.
yeah.
Um, Memory is something that is directly attached to the ability to repeat. You use it as a way to find something, or to
Yeah.
find your way back to that thing by remembering a thing, by remembering its associations.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
for instance, the rosary, there are 10 decades of the rosary, and you repeat certain prayers down the line, and they're
Hmm.
interrupted only by, there are stanza breaks in the rosary.
Right. 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 Exactly.
Right, right. So, yeah, that
I just
kind of similarity, I think I see that.
Yeah, and I love what you said about the sound
Uh-huh.
because in the yoga world, in yoga philosophy, there is mantra. Mantras don't have to necessarily be in Sanskrit. Mantras are the
Mm-hmm.
things that you tell yourself. It's like,
Right.
it could be like I suck, or I'm really powerful. It depends on like the things that you say over and over again to yourself,
That's new to
like
me. Like, I suck can be a mantra.
yeah, well, mantras aren't always a positive one,
Oh,
because
okay, gotcha.
there are things that we tell ourselves, especially young girls are
Yeah,
probably like,
gotcha,
I'm not good enough. I'm not good
gotcha.
enough.
Oh,
I'm not
yeah.
good enough. I'm not good enough. That's a mantra,
Mm-hmm.
and then we begin to believe it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a really a matter of paying attention to what
Mm-hmm.
we're saying to ourselves over and over again. But
Right.
in yoga, um, the mantras that are offered in Sanskrit are specifically designed vibrationally and in terms
Mm-hmm.
of sound frequency
Mm-hmm.
to attune our energetic vibrations, to a certain frequency, to a certain, benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can chant Om and you'll feel your whole body sort of open
Yeah,
up,
I totally buy that.
you
And
know?
even in religious practice and ritual, I think there's a corresponding kind of
Hmm.
set of
Yeah.
effects that you can
Yeah.
feel. somatically, like in your
Yeah.
body, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
for instance,
Yeah.
in the mass, you kneel, you stand, you sit,
Hmm.
you chant, you sing, or you
Right.
recite. So there's all
Right.
those different registers of sound that a body has to perform them. They have to pass through
Exactly.
your body. You can feel them.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And I want to say that that same effect happens even in non-Sanskrit, like even
Exactly.
in saying the rosary, like
Yeah.
there is this rhythm to
Mhm.
to saying the 10 Hail Marys,
You're right.
and so I'm thinking about that in relationship to poetry and how we're laying down our verses and
Hmm.
how we lay out the lines and how we
Hmm.
choose the words
Hmm.
and what does that feel like when we say them out loud. Often I tell my students, when
Yeah.
you're revising a poem, read it out loud
Yeah. Exactly.
and you'll hear where it's not working.
And I don't know, but the experience of, you can talk about Catholic experience, but it's not universal either. I think the way that Filipinos experience it is also very idiosyncratic to our own
Mm,
cultural context, our historical context, because I see that there's a lot of like indigenous, you might say, animistic perspectives that are sitting comfortably with what we've learned through Catholicism. Like in my
mm,
own family, I talk about this a lot because we do it. This is one thing we do, and it stems from being raised in a household where people just talked about like the spirits are around us. They're
hmm.
there. The ghost of your dead lolo is looking at you. So
Right, right,
I mean,
right.
it,
The
it can
Aswan.
sound it can sound cartoonish in that way, but I think the idea is that there are presences which surround us. They're energies that surround us. They're not just energies which are in the here and now. We don't know what to call them. We give them certain terms, but
Hmm.
I think that is the acknowledgement that our world is a world that can be perforated by other kinds of energy. So
Mm,
it tells us that we're not the only ones. It tells us that
yeah.
you're not necessarily the most important thing here,
Right.
right? So, I
Right.
mean, in our family, we do this thing. I come from an Ilocano family, and we
Hmm.
do this thing. It's like a spirit food offering, I guess,
Mm.
which we call atang tikararwa. So it basically is an offering to the souls or to the spirits. So
Mm.
whenever there is especially a big special occasion or Christmas, you set aside a little plate of food
Yep.
for the souls of your departed loved
Hmm.
ones or
Yeah.
relatives, or if there's an occasion to celebrate. And even my American daughter, my daughter born here in the U.S., takes that practice up along with us and feels
Hmm.
that there's nothing weird about it.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's
Right.
just sort of
Yeah.
something you grow up with. And I think
Yeah.
that's the sense that I'm talking about, that is formative in terms of this, I guess, affinity that you can have with the whole practice of conversation with something
Mm.
other than you mentioned ego, something other than yourself. I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds like you're talking to yourself too, but it's not exactly the same, if you
Right.
get what that means.
Well, yeah, because there's the ego self, which is the physical self, which is the self that's talking right now. Like you and I
Yeah,
are talking
yeah,
from our egos. But then there's like our deeper, like more spirit self,
yeah,
the
yeah,
divine self.
yeah,
When you talked about, the Buddha in me sees the Buddha in you,
yeah,
in yoga, it's the divine light, because we're
yeah,
all from God, from source.
yeah.
And so it's really talking and conversation, yeah, maybe it looks like we're talking to ourselves because we are. It's just we're
Mm-hmm.
not talking to
Mm-hmm.
our ego self. We're,
Right,
you
right.
know,
But also then, because you know that nobody's physically going to answer you, perhaps, but you start listening
hmm.
more deeply,
Yes,
perhaps, and then you get a sense of, is that an answer?
yes, yes. Yeah, that's sort of the intuitive hits
Yeah,
that we
yeah,
feel around for, right? It's
yeah,
like, which way do I go? How do I get
yeah,
guided?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Oh my God. I love this conversation. It was probably not where you thought we was going, but
I did not at all think that we were going to wind up here. Yeah,
but what's interesting to kind of circle back before
yeah.
we wrap up is that we were talking about sound and patterns and how at the beginning of our conversation you were talking about that craft book and
Mm-hmm.
thinking about patterns
Mm-hmm.
and how the river meanders. And here we are just sort of meandering, and here we are back again thinking about patterns and noticing those.
Yeah.
And
And
how we
reading
can
that
relate to
book, I mean, I'm also thinking now in terms of how do I, as the bearer of well, how do I say, I am a person of color, I'm a woman of color with a particular body that manifests in certain physical ways. How do I perceive the patterns in my own formation, in my own history, as a body
Yeah.
moving through the world with this particular,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. That's a big question.
yeah, it is a big question. I don't know the answer yet, but we'll see.
Yeah. We'll see it in your next book.
Ooh, no pressure, right?
No pressure at all.
Yeah,
All right, Louisa. So, did you bring a poem that you would like to share with us to close out the episode?
I did, and I wasn't sure. I have like two or three possibilities, but I think now I will go with the original one that I had intended to read. It is from an earlier book. It's from a 2014 book called Ode to the Heart Smaller Than a Pencil Eraser from Utah State University Press. And it's a poem called Fata Morgana. So I think I've gone back to this because of the way you started this out with that selection from Hafiz, which is about fate, right? And wanting to know your destiny. So Fata Morgana. What is the name of that goddess in the print? Her arms full of instruments for music and torture, her mouth beautiful like a flower or the tip of a spear, her red painted feet flashing across hot coals and a circle of fire. I am not cunning like that. I am not fierce or graceful, and it's become harder to read more than one book at once. Do you remember when I tried to cook two things at the same time on the two hot plates of the stove? One saucepan was burned so badly we had to throw it away. And as I stood in the yard before I dropped the piece of disfigured metal with its melted plastic handle into the trash, I remember the way my father looked just hours after his death, laid out on a bed for want of a coffin, arms folded on his chest in the attitude of peaceful sleeping. His skin had not cooled yet. His cheeks had not taken on the hue of those who've started walking away from this place and will no longer look at the spill of late flowering blooms by the fence. With my two arms, I hugged myself the way another would. With my two hands, I gathered up and tied my hair. I walked back to my house of appetites, my house of things, my life of many parts, waiting to be wound and folded, mended, counted, found.
Beautiful. Oh, beautiful. I love the imagery in that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, too.
Thank you for sharing that, Louisa. And thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm so glad we got to have this conversation.
Yeah, this is so much fun.
And I loved layering the poetry with the teaching, with the spiritual, religious, all those things. Just, so good.
Yeah, this is such a cool thing that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. I have fun doing it. I love.
Yeah, I
when
can
get to
tell.
talk to
I can
people.
tell. You're playing too, right?
I'm totally playing it. Totally.
Yeah.
So let's close the episode as we always do. The divine light in me bows to the divine light in you. Until next time, my friends, namaste.